Eric Stevens never believed in luck, only in control. He built his life on discipline, careful planning, and an unshakable instinct for deception, both spotting it and using it when necessary. So, when he first suspected that his wife, Melissa, was lying to him, he didn't confront her. He didn't scream, didn't throw accusations. No, that wasn't his style. Instead, he watched. It started with small things. A shift in her tone when she spoke to him, a new perfume she never wore around the house, the way she casually mentioned late meetings at work, but always seemed to come home with her lipstick slightly smudged, her hair too perfect for someone exhausted from a long day. The breaking point came on a Wednesday night. Melissa was in the shower, her phone charging on the nightstand. A message lit up the screen. Can't stop thinking about last night. Same time tomorrow? Eric didn't touch the phone. He didn't need to. The name attached to the message, Jason H., was all the confirmation he required. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the phone as the shower ran in the background. His heartbeat remained steady, his mind already calculating. Confronting her now would be useless. She would deny, twist the story, cry, make promises, and even if she admitted it, even if she begged for forgiveness, what then? No, Eric wasn't the kind of man who left things unfinished. If she thought she could betray him and walk away unscathed, she was gravely mistaken. The game had just begun. That night, as Melissa slept beside him, Eric stared at the ceiling, mapping out his strategy. The next morning, he moved swiftly. By noon, he had hired a private investigator, one of the best in the city, discreet and ruthless. He requested full surveillance, photos, videos, timestamps, everything. By Friday, the first batch of evidence arrived. Melissa, in a dimly lit hotel bar, her fingers grazing Jason's wrist as she leaned in too close. Melissa, slipping out of their home in an outfit she never wore around Eric, a sly smile on her lips. Melissa, kissing Jason in the parking garage of a hotel Eric had driven past 1,000 times before. The images were crisp, undeniable, each one burned into Eric's mind like a brand. He closed the folder and took a slow, measured breath. Now it was his turn. He wasn't just going to leave. He wasn't going to yell or cry or let her manipulate her way out of this. No, Eric was going to take everything. And when he was finished, Melissa would be left with nothing but regret. Eric Stevens was a man of patience. He understood that revenge, when executed properly, was an art form. A hasty reaction would have given Melissa the upper hand, pleading, lying, manipulating. But if he let her believe she was still in control, he could dismantle her world piece by piece without her suspecting a thing. For the next 2 weeks, Eric played the role of the devoted husband. He kissed her goodbye every morning, asked about her day, and even surprised her with small gifts. She, in turn, responded with a renewed affection. Perhaps out of guilt, or maybe because she truly believed she had everything under control. She had no idea that every moment was a carefully calculated move in a game she had already lost. Step 1, cutting the strings. The first thing Eric did was secure his financial assets. While Melissa prided herself on her lavish lifestyle, designer clothes, luxury spa days, impulsive shopping sprees, she never bothered to check the source of it all. Their shared accounts gave her easy access to funds, but Eric had been the sole provider. A quiet meeting with his financial advisor ensured that Melissa's access was being revoked. Their joint accounts? Frozen. The credit card she used without thought? Canceled. The savings account she assumed she could fall back on? Drained and moved to an offshore account. Melissa wouldn't notice immediately. Eric made sure of that. The transition was subtle, the kind that would only make itself known when she truly needed it. Step 2, the lover's weakness. Jason Hart was a textbook narcissist, charming, wealthy, and self-serving. He thrived on the thrill of the chase, but lacked the spine to deal with real consequences. Eric knew that a man like Jason would never stay in a situation that threatened his reputation, career, or bank account. That's why Eric made sure to feed him just enough paranoia to make him sweat. A single untraceable email arrived in Jason's inbox late one night. I know what you've been doing. So does her husband. Hope you've got an exit plan. A second email followed an hour later, this time with an attached image. One of him and Melissa entering the hotel together. Jason, who lived by the philosophy that secrets were only dangerous when exposed, panicked immediately. Eric had expected as much. Over the next few days, he watched as Jason slowly distanced himself, canceled plans, ignored messages, and eventually stopped answering Melissa altogether. Melissa, in her arrogance, thought she had Jason wrapped around her finger. She didn't realize that all it took was a well-placed whisper to make her whole affair unravel. Step 3, letting her trap herself. One evening, as Melissa applied her makeup for yet another work dinner, Eric casually mentioned something that made her pause. I was thinking of selling the house. Melissa's hand froze mid-brushstroke. Selling? Why? I don't know, Eric said with a thoughtful expression. Just feels like a change is needed. Maybe something smaller, something new. Melissa forced a smile. That's unexpected. She was already worried. He could see it in her eyes. She needed stability, security. She had assumed Eric would always be there, that his love, or at least his complacency, would be unshakable. But this was the first hint that her safety net was disappearing. Later that night, she scrolled through her phone, attempting to call Jason. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. Eric lay beside her, eyes closed, listening to her breathing change as the reality of her situation began to settle in. She thought she was in control, but soon she'd learn just how wrong she was. Melissa Stevens had always considered herself untouchable. She played the role of the perfect wife with ease, charming, poised, beautiful, and yet she had never truly believed in consequences. She thought that as long as she maintained the illusion, the truth could never hurt her. But illusions only worked when everyone else played along. And Eric had stopped playing. A slow realization. It started with small inconveniences. So minor they could almost be dismissed as bad luck. Her credit card declined at an upscale boutique. The cashier smiled politely, suggesting she try another. Melissa laughed it off, assuming it was an error. But when she swiped her backup card, it was also declined. A quick call to her bank left her more confused than before. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the representative said. "Your account has been temporarily frozen due to suspicious activity. We'll need to verify some details before reinstating access." Suspicious activity? Melissa knew she hadn't done anything unusual, at least not financially. She didn't think much of it until later that evening when she tried to order dinner on her usual food delivery app. Payment failed. Annoyed, she reached for her phone to transfer funds from their joint savings account, but when she logged in, she found an empty balance. Panic began to creep in. When Eric got home, she was waiting for him in the living room, her expression carefully controlled, but her fingers clutching her phone too tightly. "Eric, something's wrong with our accounts," she said, attempting to sound casual. "Did you notice anything weird?" He tilted his head slightly as if considering her words. Then, with the same detached calm he always carried, he shrugged. "No idea. I'll take a look tomorrow." Tomorrow. Melissa's frustration flared, but she swallowed it. She didn't want to seem desperate. She told herself it was a mistake, a glitch, but deep down she knew this wasn't an accident. Eric was doing something, losing control. Melissa's unease turned into full-blown paranoia over the next few days. Jason had stopped answering her calls altogether. Messages went unread. The one time she tried to call from a different number, he picked up, only to immediately hang up the moment he recognized her voice. She told herself he was just being careful, that it had nothing to do with Eric, but she didn't believe it. Eric had become different, not in any obvious way. No fights, no accusations. He still kissed her goodbye in the mornings, still asked how her day was, but there was something in his eyes when he looked at her now, something cold and unreadable. Then came the whispers at work. Melissa had spent years curating an image of sophistication and influence in her social circles. She was the woman other women envied. Wealthy, beautiful, married to a successful man, but lately people seemed lunch invitations dwindled, conversations cut off when she entered the room. She caught glances, half smirks, the kind that suggested they knew something she didn't. It wasn't until she overheard two colleagues whispering outside the office restroom that she realized just how deep it ran. "Did you hear? The husband found out." "No, are you serious?" "I mean, I don't know for sure, but Jason is freaking out. I heard he's trying to get transferred to another city." Melissa's blood turned to ice. She pushed open the door with more force than necessary, making her presence known. The two women startled, exchanging a guilty glance before muttering half-hearted greetings and scurrying away. Melissa stood there, staring at her reflection in the mirror. For the first time in her life, she saw what she had refused to acknowledge. She was losing. The final blow. By the end of the week, Melissa's desperation had reached its peak. She came home to find Eric sitting in his study, laptop open, sipping his usual glass of whiskey. His face remained unreadable as he looked up at her. "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. Eric leaned back in his chair, setting his glass down with deliberate care. "Do we?" Melissa's heart pounded. She had rehearsed this conversation 100 times in her head. She had prepared excuses, defenses, manipulations. But as she stood there, facing her husband's unreadable expression, she realized something terrifying. None of it would work. He already knew. He had always known. "What are you doing?" she asked finally, her voice quieter than she intended. Eric studied her for a long moment before speaking. "I'm just watching, Melissa." He swirled his drink idly. "Watching you dig your own grave." Her breath hitched. "You? I know about Jason," he continued, voice smooth as silk. "I know about the hotel, the lies, the way you thought you could play me for a fool." Melissa opened her mouth to argue, to spin a new narrative, but Eric held up a single finger. "And before you even try to deny it," he said, reaching into his desk drawer, "I'd suggest you take a look at these." He pulled out a thick envelope and tossed it onto the desk between them. Photos spilled out. Her and Jason, caught in crystal clear betrayal. Her knees nearly buckled. Eric leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, his expression unreadable. "You see, Melissa," he murmured, "I never planned to yell or cry or let you gaslight me into forgiving you." He gestured to the images. "I planned for this." Melissa swallowed hard. "What do you want?" Eric chuckled, the sound low and dangerous. "Oh, I already have what I want," he said. "I've frozen your accounts, cancel your credit cards, and since the prenup ensures you get nothing if you cheat," he spread his hands. "Well, let's just say you should start looking for a new place to live." Melissa's breath came in shallow gasps. "Eric, please save it." His voice turned to steel. "The divorce papers will be served tomorrow. You can sign them, or we can go to court and let everyone see exactly who you are." Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't have to do this." "Yes," Eric said smoothly, standing up. "I do." He grabbed his keys and walked past her without another word. Melissa sank into the chair he had vacated, her world crashing down around her. She had always thought she could control everything. She had never realized that the real game had been his all along. Melissa Stevens had always known how to escape trouble. She had built her life on carefully curated lies, calculated charm, and the firm belief that she could always land on her feet. But as she sat alone in the now eerily quiet house, the weight of her downfall pressed against her chest like an iron fist. Eric was gone, Jason had vanished. And for the first time in her life, she had no way out. The first realization, nowhere to turn. Melissa's instinct was to call someone, anyone. She reached for her phone with trembling fingers and dialed Jason's number. It rang once, twice. Then, "This number has been disconnected." Her stomach dropped. She tried his work number, only to be met with the same response. Desperation creeping in, she searched his name online. No new activity. No social media updates. Nothing. Jason Hart had disappeared. Melissa swallowed hard, her mind racing. Had Jason really left the city, or had Eric orchestrated his exit? The thought sent a chill down her spine. She needed to get ahead of this. Without hesitation, she dialed the one person she knew would help her. Her best friend, Lauren. It rang. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. Melissa clenched her jaw, exhaling sharply before trying again. This time, it went straight to voicemail. Her hands tightened around the phone. Lauren was avoiding her. She switched tactics, opening her text messages. "Melissa, Lauren, call me. It's urgent." No response. She scrolled through their last conversation, looking for something, anything to explain this sudden silence. And then she saw it. A message from Lauren, sent 2 days ago. "We need to talk." Melissa had ignored it, brushing it off as unimportant. Now she realized the truth. Lauren must have found out. Eric had been methodical. He hadn't just ruined her financially, he had isolated her. The second realization, the walls close in. Determined not to panic, Melissa grabbed her purse and headed for the door. Her first stop was the bank, If she could just talk to someone in person, she could figure out what was happening with her accounts. The bank teller greeted her with a polite but distant smile. "How can I help you today?" Melissa forced a charming smile. "I need to check on my accounts. I think there's been a mistake." The teller typed into the system, her expression neutral. After a few moments, she looked up. "Your accounts have been frozen due to pending legal action." Melissa's breath hitched. "Legal action? I'm afraid I can't provide details. You'll need to speak with your legal representative." Melissa's fingers curled into fists. "This is ridiculous. I need access to my money." The teller's expression remained unmoved. "I'm sorry, ma'am. There's nothing I can do." Melissa stormed out of the bank, her heels clicking against the pavement. She needed money, she needed a lawyer, she needed someone on her side. She tried calling another friend, Amanda. No answer. She tried Jessica. Straight to voicemail. Each name she tried, the response was the same: silence. Eric hadn't just cut off her finances, he had destroyed her reputation. The third realization: public humiliation. Melissa's last hope was her job. If she could keep her position, she could rebuild. She arrived at her office, head held high, forcing herself to act like nothing was wrong. But the moment she stepped inside, she felt it. The stares, the whispers. Her boss, Mr. Calloway, was waiting for her. His expression was unreadable. "Melissa, can we speak in my office?" Melissa's throat tightened, but she nodded. She followed him inside, sitting stiffly in the chair across from his desk. He folded his hands. "Melissa, I need to ask you something, and I'd appreciate your honesty." She feigned confusion. "Of course." He hesitated before sliding a folder across the desk. "We received an anonymous tip about your personal affairs." Melissa's breath caught as she opened the folder. Inside were photos. Jason, the hotel. Her hands trembled as she shut the folder. "This is a private matter," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. Calloway sighed. "It would be if it hadn't become public knowledge. We can't have this kind of controversy attached to the company. Our clients value discretion." Melissa's nails dug into her palm. "You're firing me." Calloway looked genuinely regretful. "I'm giving you the option to resign. It'll look better on your record." Melissa's world spun. She had nothing. No money, no job, no allies. Eric had dismantled her life flawlessly. The final realization: checkmate. With nowhere left to turn, Melissa went home, only to find that she no longer had a home. The locks had been changed. A neatly placed eviction notice was taped to the door. Her stomach twisted as she grabbed the paper, her eyes scanning the words she never thought she'd see. Per court order, Melissa Stevens is no longer permitted access to this property. Melissa staggered back, gripping the railing for support. She had nothing left. Eric had taken everything, and she never even saw it coming. Epilogue: the last move. As Melissa sat on the cold pavement, staring at the home that was no longer hers, her phone buzzed. A message from Eric. She opened it with shaking hands. "Eric, enjoy your new life, Melissa. This is what you wanted, isn't it?" Tears burned in her eyes as the weight of her actions crushed her. She had always thought she was the one in control, but Eric had been pulling the strings all along. Melissa Stevens had never truly known what it felt like to be powerless. She had always had options, always had a backup plan, a way to twist the narrative in her favor. But now, as she sat on the cold pavement outside what used to be her home, clutching the eviction notice in trembling hands, she realized something horrifying. There was no escape. Eric had made sure of that. The weight of defeat. She had spent the last 2 days drifting between hotel lobbies and coffee shops, desperately trying to find someone, anyone, who would take her in. Lauren wasn't returning her calls. Her other friends had either blocked her number or fed her lukewarm excuses. "I just think it's best if we take some space right now, Melissa." Even her own family had turned against her. Her mother's voice had been cold when she called. "I saw the photos, Melissa. Your father won't even speak about it. You embarrassed all of us." Melissa had stared at her phone in disbelief, as if expecting it to ring again, as if waiting for an apology that would never come. It didn't. It never would. That night, she spent her last bit of cash on a dingy motel room where the flickering overhead light buzzed like a taunt. Once, she had bathed in marble tubs wrapped in silk sheets, spent her nights in five-star suites. Now she was sitting on a scratchy polyester bedspread, staring at a stained ceiling, wondering how everything had collapsed so fast. The attempt at redemption. She had one last hope, Eric. The thought made her stomach turn, but she had no choice. She called him, half expecting the call to go straight to voicemail. Instead, he answered after 2 rings. Melissa. His voice was calm, unreadable. She swallowed. "Eric, Please. There was silence on the other end. Then, finally, a soft chuckle. Please, what? Melissa clenched her jaw. I made a mistake. Another pause. Then his voice dropped into something dangerously smooth. You made a lot of mistakes. Tears welled in her eyes. I know, Eric, but I don't have anywhere to go. I don't have anyone. There was no immediate response. And for a moment, hope flickered in her chest. Maybe he would give her a chance. Maybe he would take pity on her. And his voice came through, steady as ice. You had me, Melissa, and you threw me away. Her breath hitched. Eric, I warned you, he continued, unbothered by her desperation. I told you what would happen if you ever betrayed me. Melissa gripped the phone tighter. I'll do anything, Eric. Please, He cut her off with a sharp laugh. You still think you can negotiate, don't you? Melissa's heart pounded. No, he said finally, his voice like a blade slicing through her last shred of dignity. We're done. The line went dead, and with it, so did the last remnants of her old life. The reality of ruin. The next morning, Melissa sat outside the motel, watching people pass by, their lives intact, untouched by the kind of destruction she was drowning in. She had spent years weaving lies, thinking she was untouchable, convinced that she could outmaneuver anything. But Eric had been the better player all along. She had laughed behind his back, thinking he was weak, boring, predictable. She had never realized that he was watching, planning, waiting. And when the time had come, he hadn't just left her. He had erased her. With nowhere left to go, she reached into her purse, feeling for the one thing she had left. Her wedding ring. She had taken it off months ago, tossing it carelessly onto the dresser before heading out to meet Jason. Now she held it tightly in her palm, the metal cool against her skin. It was all she had left of him, and the bitter truth was it was worth more than she was now. Final scene, the lesson she never wanted. As the sun began to set, Melissa finally let reality sink in. Eric was gone. Jason had abandoned her. And she was truly, utterly alone. For the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to lose everything. And the cruelest part, she had done it to herself.